This is a slow, true story from Japan, gentle enough to fall asleep to, about a boy who lost everything twice. Passed quietly between relatives, he finally lands with two near strangers, Kenji and Emi, who choose to keep him. They give him a home, a family, and a future he never let himself want out loud. But happiness like that rarely goes unchallenged, and Haruto will lose more before this night is over. Listen for the one small word he holds back for years, and finally, quietly, learns to say, "Close your eyes now, and let his story carry you gently toward your own quiet sleep." In a small house at the edge of a quiet town, a 9-year-old boy named Haruto lay wrapped in a blanket on the tatami floor, listening for the sound of his family's car turning into the driveway. He had a light fever that evening, nothing serious, only enough to keep him home from the errand his parents had planned, and it left him feeling slow and warm and a little far away from himself, the way a fever always did. His mother, Rin, had tucked the blanket around his shoulders twice before she left the house, smoothing it flat with her palm each time, the way she always did when she was worrying more than she wanted to say out loud. His father, Daichi, had ruffled his hair at the door on his way out and told him to drink his tea, finish his rice, and go easy on the manga stacked by his pillow. His little brother, Sora, only 6 years old, had begged to be allowed to stay home too, on the theory that a fever might be catching if you sat close enough to it. And his sister, Mei, for years old and already, in Haruto's private opinion, the bossiest person in the entire house, had told Sora very plainly that sick boys did not get to choose anything, and neither did he. So the four of them, Daichi, Rin, Sora, and Mei, had climbed into the car together and driven off into the early dark, going to pick up a birthday cake for Haruto, whose birthday was 2 days away, and a new pair of shoes as well, since his old ones had gone soft and thin at the toe. The house had gone quiet around him then, the particular kind of quiet a house only ever has when it is simply waiting for its people to come home to it. Later that same night, though Haruto did not know this yet, there would come a knock at the door that was not his father's knock, unhurried and heavy in a way the family's knock never was. An old man in a coat still dark with rain would kneel down across from him on the cold floor of the Genkin. The entryway, take both of Haruto's hands in his own weathered ones, and tell him, in a voice working very hard to hold itself steady, that Haruto would come and live with him now. For now, though, Haruto only knew that it was getting late, that the rice in the cooker had long since gone from hot to merely warm, and that outside the window the rain had begun softly, without any hurry to it at all. He turned the pages of his homework without really reading any of it, the numbers swimming faintly in the lamp, light the way they do for any tired child at the end of a long day. Every few minutes, he lifted his head at the sound of an engine on the road outside, and every time it turned out to be some other car, going to some other house, belonging to some family that was not his. The clock on the wall was a cheap plastic thing shaped like a grinning cat, its tail swinging back and forth to mark the seconds. A birthday gift from an uncle 2 Christmases ago, that nobody in the family had ever quite had the heart to take down. It ticked its way past the hour his mother had promised they would be home by, and then past the next one after that. Haruto told himself, in the small, stubborn way children reassure themselves, that they had probably stopped for gas, or that May had needed the toilet again, because May always seemed to need the toilet at the worst possible moment. He was not yet old enough to have learned that a mind builds these small, ordinary excuses the way a body shivers in the cold, without being asked to, simply to keep a person warm a little longer than the truth would allow. It was the telephone that finally broke the quiet of the house, and Haruto would remember afterward, for years afterward, that he had let it ring twice before he made himself stand up to answer it. Some small, unfamiliar part of him had already decided that he did not want to know what was on the other end of that line. The voice belonged to a neighbor, a woman he knew only by sight from the vegetable stand near the station, and she did not explain very much. She only told him that he should stay exactly where he was, that someone would be coming for him soon, and that he might not want to turn on the television that evening. Haruto sat back down on the tatami with the receiver still warm in his hand, and understood, in the vague, weather-sensing way that children understand these things, that something in his life had already tilted, even though nothing in the room itself had moved at all. The cat clock kept swinging its tail. The rain kept falling on the roof. Nothing in the house agreed to slow down for him. It was Takashi, his mother's father, who came through the door before midnight, his coat dark and heavy with rain across the shoulders, his glasses fogged from the change in temperature. Haruto noticed, and would go on noticing for the rest of his life, that even that night, even carrying whatever he was carrying up the front step, Takashi still took the time to set his shoes neatly side by side in the genkan, the way some habits simply refuse to be put down, no matter what else has happened. Takashi did not try to say everything at once. He lowered himself down onto the floor of the entryway instead, so that he and Haruto were at the same height, the way you might crouch to speak to someone standing very near the edge of something, not wanting them to startle and step back. There had been an accident, he said, quietly on the wet road just outside town, the kind of accident that happens inside a single unlucky second and is over before anyone involved has time to understand it. Daichi and Rin and Sora and Mei, all four of them together in the car, had not survived it. The story does not need, and Haruto himself never once wanted, the particular details of that road or that hour, and so they can stay exactly where they belong, folded away in some old report in a drawer somewhere, while the family that mattered gets to stay whole a little longer in memory. What Haruto did remember clearly, and would go on remembering for years, was that Takashi had not cried in front of him that first night. Not once, though his hands had trembled slightly around Haruto's on the whole time he held them. Takashi simply stayed there with him on the floor of that small house until the sky outside began, reluctantly, to turn from black to gray. Neither of them said very much more that night. There did not seem to be a right amount of words for a night like that one, and Takashi, to his quiet credit, did not try to invent any that were not true. In the days that followed, days Haruto could only recall afterward in loose, disconnected pieces, like photographs shaken out of an album, relatives came and went through the small house in careful, hushed voices, the kind adults use when they think a child cannot possibly hear them. He could hear every word. Some of the relatives looked at him the way people look at a piece of furniture that clearly needs to be moved, but that nobody wants to be the one responsible for carrying. It was Takashi who settled the matter, quietly, without calling any sort of family meeting or making any sort of announcement, simply saying that the boy would come and live with him from now on, and that this was not a question anyone else in the room needed to weigh in on. Haruto was too tired in those days to feel very much about it one way or another, only a kind of distant relief, the same relief you feel when someone else finally picks up the heavy bag you have been carrying too long before you have even managed to say thank you. He packed his own things into 2 cardboard boxes that had once held mandarin oranges, and he still remembered, years later, exactly what went into each one. Into the first box went his clothes, his homework, and his father's old fishing cap, faded at the brim, though he could not have told anyone why that particular cap mattered so much to him. Into the second box went May's small stuffed rabbit, missing one button eye, because nobody else in that hurried, grieving house had thought to save it, and Haruto could not let it simply be thrown away with the rest. The drive out to Takashi's house took a little under an hour, past flooded rice fields, and along a slow brown river Haruto had only seen a handful of times before in his life. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. Every few minutes, though, Takashi would glance sideways at him, the careful, checking sort of glance you give a candle burning in a draft, just to be sure it was still lit. Takashi's house, when they finally reached it, was older than the one Haruto had grown up in, a wooden house with paper screens gone soft and amber-colored at their edges from decades of sun. It smelled of green tea and old tatami and, faintly, of the liniment Takashi rubbed into his knees each evening, the smell Haruto would come, in time, to think of as simply the smell of being safe. That first evening, Takashi laid out a futon for him in the small back room without being asked to, smoothing the blanket flat with his hands in a way that was almost, though not quite, the way Rin used to do it, though of course Takashi could never have known that. He set a cup of barley tea down beside the pillow as well, in case Haruto woke thirsty sometime in the night. He did not say a great deal else that evening, Takashi, only that Haruto should sleep now. That morning would arrive regardless of whether either of them felt ready for it, and that he, Takashi, would be right there down the short hallway if Haruto needed anything at all, however small. Haruto lay in the dark of that unfamiliar room and listened to an unfamiliar house settling around him, the particular creaks and sighs of old wood that his own house had never made. He found himself thinking, with the plain and unguarded honesty that children still have before the world gets around to teaching them to soften things, that he did not know this old man very well yet. Not really, but that he already did not feel quite so entirely alone in the world. Outside, the rain had eased down to almost nothing, just the faintest whisper against the paper screen above his head. Somewhere down the hall he could hear Takashi still moving quietly about, closing a drawer, setting down a cup, the small, ordinary sounds of another person simply being awake and present and near. And for one very long, very quiet night that turned out to be enough, Let that moment rest now, exactly as it was. There's no need to hold on to every detail. Only the feeling of it, settling slowly into the quiet around you. If your eyes have already closed, that is all right. You do not need to follow every word from here. We stay with them a little longer, letting the silence do its own quiet work before the night carries us gently onward. This is still the same story, the same night unfolding, only a little further along now. Nothing here needs to be rushed. Take a slow breath in and let it out even slower, and feel your body grow heavier with each one. When you are ready, we will continue on softly into what comes next. In a quiet house at the edge of a small town, a boy named Haruto had just begun his first year of middle school, and for a while, his life had settled into something he almost dared to call ordinary. He lived there with his grandfather, an old man named Takashi, and the two of them had worked out, without ever really discussing it, a rhythm that suited them both. Takashi woke early, the way old men do, and by the time Haruto came down the hall in his school uniform, there was rice already in the cooker and tea already going lukewarm on the low table. Neither of them talked much in the mornings. There was a small garden out past the kitchen window, nothing grand, just a few rows of vegetables and a persimmon tree Takashi was forever threatening to prune, and some mornings Haruto would find him out there in his slippers, moving slowly between the rows with a hand pressed to the small of his back. This suited Haruto more than anyone in that house could have known, because talking meant explaining, and explaining meant going back over the year. He'd already lost his mother and his father and his little brother and sister all at once. In a single afternoon, he still couldn't quite hold in his mind hole. Takashi never asked him to explain any of it. He simply made a little more rice than one old man needed, left the porch light on a bit longer in the evenings, and let Haruto exist in his house the way you'd let a stray cat exist in your garden, without making a fuss of it, without demanding gratitude, just leaving the door unlocked. In the evenings, the two of them would sit on the tatami with a low table between them, the smell of the mats warm and a little sweet in the summer heat, and Takashi would read his newspaper while Haruto did homework he only half meant to finish. And so, without either of them announcing it, Haruto had begun to let himself believe, quietly and a little fearfully, that this might be the place he stayed. It's a dangerous thing, hoping for permanence, when you've already learned once how fast a family can be taken from you. But he hoped anyway, the way children do, in the part of themselves that hasn't yet been taught not to. Middle school went on around in the way it does for everyone, with homework and hallway noise and the particular boredom of an afternoon that won't end. Looking back on it later, Haruto would remember a few small things about that first year that, at the time, meant nothing at all. Takashi eating a little less rice than he used to. Takashi sitting down on the porch steps halfway through sweeping them, just to catch his breath, and telling Haruto it was nothing, just an old man's knees. Takashi napping in the afternoon now, when he never used to nap at all, the newspaper sliding slowly off his lap and onto the tatami while the light in the room changed color without him. A boy of 12 does not watch for these things in the one adult he has left in the world, because some part of him has decided quietly, that this person is the exception, the one who is not allowed to disappear. So he didn't watch, and there was no reason he should have. And none of what came next was in any way his fault, though it would take him years to fully believe that. The day it happened was, in every visible way, an ordinary Tuesday. Haruto walked home from school the usual way, past the vending machine that always ate his coins, past the neighbor's persimmon tree, thinking about nothing more important than whether there be enough hot water left for a bath. He came in through the door the way he always did, calling out that he was home in the small, flat voice of a boy who expects an answer. There wasn't one. The house had a particular kind of quiet to it. He would say later, not the quiet of a nap, but a thicker, older quiet, the kind of house makes when there's no longer anyone breathing inside it to disturb the air. He set his bag down by the door, out of habit more than thought, and moved through the rooms one at a time, calling out again, a little smaller each time, the way you do when part of you already knows. He found Takashi in the back room, and it was over soon, and without much cruelty, the way some deaths are, though that never seems to make them any easier to carry. There was no long illness to prepare for it, no slow fading that at least give the family time to say the things they mean to say. One evening he had been an old man clearing his throat over dinner, and the next, he simply wasn't there anymore. And the difference between those two facts was more than Haruto's mind knew how to hold. For a while, he didn't cry. He just stood in the doorway of that room, in his school uniform, his bag still on one shoulder, doing the strange arithmetic of a boy, trying to work out how a person could lose the same kind of thing twice in 2 years and still be expected to get up for school the next morning. He sat down on the floor of the hallway after that, not quite outside the room and not quite inside it, and waited because there didn't seem to be anything else a person could usefully do. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a phone was already ringing, and the machinery that follows a death, the calls and the forms and the low voices at the door, had already begun to move faster than any single person's grief could keep pace with. The funeral, when it came, was small and correctly done. Incense and murmured sutras and the particular gray light that seems to follow these things no matter the season. Relatives Haruto barely knew arrived in dark, careful clothing and stood in small clusters near the back, speaking to each other in the low, practical tones people use when they think a child can't hear them. He heard them anyway. What they were discussing in those low voices was not Takashi, not really, not for long. It was him, what to do about him, whose turn it might reasonably be, who had the room, who had already done their share. Nobody was cruel about it, exactly. It's only that grief, when it has to share a room with practical arrangements, tends to lose to the practical arrangements almost every time, and a 12-year-old boy standing quietly by the incense burner learns that lesson faster than anyone would like him to. He remembered of all things, the smoke from the incense curling up toward the ceiling in a thin gray line, and thinking that it was strange how something so small could hold his attention so completely when everything else in the room felt too large to look at directly. He would say, much later, that he didn't blame any of them, not really, that everyone there was simply doing the difficult arithmetic of a life that had too many people needing homes and not quite enough rooms to put them in. But he remembered, all the same, exactly how it felt to be discussed instead of comforted at his own grandfather's funeral, and that particular feeling would follow him for a long while after the incense had gone cold. What followed was 2 years that Haruto, even afterward, found hard to lay out in order, because they didn't come to him in order. They came back as a blur of different ceilings, different smells of laundry soap, different sound a house makes when it's settled for the night. He went first to a great aunt on his mother's side, then, after a few months, somewhere else, and then somewhere else again, each move made with perfectly good reasons that were explained to him carefully and that he mostly stopped listening to by the third time. He learned to recognize, almost from the first night, the particular texture of a room that had been someone's storage space before it became his, the outline of boxes still faint in the tatami, a closet that didn't quite empty all the way. There was one house, he remembered, where he could hear another family's dinner through the thin wall behind his futon, the clatter of chopsticks, and someone laughing at something he'd never know the punchline to. And he would lie there in the dark, listening to a warmth that wasn't quite his to keep. He learned not to unpack his bag all the way, not out of any decision he remembered making, just a habit his hands picked up on their own, the way you learn to duck under a low doorway after you've hit your head on it once. He changed schools 3 times in those years, enough that by the end of it, he'd become something of a small mystery in whichever classroom he landed in. The quiet transfer student who never quite explained where he'd come from, and somehow never stayed long enough for anyone to think to ask. It wasn't that the relatives who took him in were unkind, not most of them. A few were genuinely warm in the brief windows he had with them, and he was careful, even then, to be grateful for that. But warmth offered to a boy who is only passing through does something strange to a person. It teaches them to be pleasant and easy to house and never quite any trouble, while keeping some small back room of themselves that they never quite let anyone into. Haruto got very good at that back room. He got good, in fact, at nearly everything that didn't require anyone else to be reliable: homework, timetables, the exact bus schedule of whichever town he happened to be in that season. It was around this time that he found the library. It hadn't started out as anything meaningful. He went, in the beginning, for the plainest reason there was, which was that going home, to whichever home currently held his things, never felt quite as easy as it should, and the library, at least, never asked him anything. It was warm in winter and cool in summer, and the light through its windows in the late afternoon had a particular yellow softness to it, the kind that makes the dust in the air look almost gold. The shelves smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax, and the whole building had a hush to it that felt different from the silence of an empty house, a companionable kind of quiet, the sort made by other people quietly existing near him without wanting anything from him at all. Nobody there wanted to discuss his living arrangements. Nobody there needed him to be easy or pleasant or grateful. He could simply sit at the long table near the window, with his textbooks open in front of him, and be exactly as tired and as quiet as he actually felt. An old librarian who never once asked why a boy his age spent so many evenings there instead of at home, took to leaving the reading lamp on a little longer near closing time, on the nights he was still bent over his books when the rest of the room had gone dark. He never said anything about it, and neither did Haruto. and somehow that small, unspoken understanding between them became one of the steadier things in his week. He started studying, at first, simply because it filled the hours that had nowhere else to go. And there is a particular kind of studying that happens when a boy has nothing waiting for him at home to interrupt it. The seasons turn outside the library windows without much ceremony. Cherry blossoms, and then the long, wet gray of the rains, and then the flat, white light of winter. And through all of it, he kept his same seat, near the same window, as if staying still in one small place might make up for how much the rest of his life kept moving. It surprised him a little when the grades that came back were good ones, not because he doubted himself exactly, but because he had never once done any of it for the grades. He had done it because the library had a chair that felt like his, in his own mind, if nowhere else, and because for 2 or 3 hours in the evening, in that particular warm light, nobody was deciding anything about him. That, it turned out, was reason enough. He didn't complain in those years, not out loud, and not to anyone who might have carried the complaint further than it needed to go. There didn't seem to be much use in it. The relatives who took him in were, in their own overstretched way, doing him a kindness, and he understood, with a clarity most boys his age don't yet have, that kindness offered reluctantly is still kindness, and worth a quiet thank you. But somewhere underneath the studying and the moving and the careful, practiced ease he'd built for himself, there was still a boy who remembered exactly what it felt like to have a grandfather leave the porch light on for him without being asked. He hadn't forgotten that feeling. He'd only put it away somewhere, the way you put away a coat for a season you're not sure is coming back. And so that was where he was for those 2 strange, unsettled years, not quite lost, not quite anywhere either. A boy who had gotten remarkably good at packing a bag on short notice, and who still, in the last hour before the library closed, let himself sit a little longer than he had to in the warm lamplight, in no particular hurry to go back to whichever house was, for now, calling itself home. And that, for tonight, is where we can let him rest a while. Not because the story ends there, but because even a boy in the middle of an unsettled few years deserves, now and then, one quiet hour under a good lamp with nothing being decided about him at all. Let that moment rest now, soft and unhurried, the way a held breath finally settles back into an easy rhythm. There's no need to hurry past it. No need to explain it further. Some feelings simply need time to loosen their grip quietly on their own. If your eyes have already closed, that is all right. You can let the sound of this voice carry you rather than the meaning of every word. The night continues around them, patient and unbroken, and so does their story, unfolding slowly the way truth often does. Not all at once, but in small, gentle turns. Stay here a little longer. Breathe slowly. Let the next quiet turn arrive on its own. In a small house at the edge of a quiet street, in the 3rd year of middle school, a boy named Haruto stood in the entryway with a soft canvas bag on one shoulder, waiting to find out whether the door in front of him would really open the way it had been promised. He had learned, by then, not to trust a promise until it had actually happened, because promises in his life had a way of dissolving before they reached the morning. The couple who lived here, Kenji and Emi, were only distantly related to him, some branch of the family so far out that it had needed explaining twice, and yet they were the ones who had asked for him, not the other way around. It was the start of the third term, the middle of a cold January, and Haruto had already lived in 4 different houses since his parents died. Each one had been a little colder than the last, in ways that had nothing to do with the weather. So when Emmy opened the door before he had even knocked, smiling as though this were an ordinary Tuesday and not the day a stranger's whole life changed hands, Haruto found himself looking past her into the house for the catch. There is always a catch, he had come to believe, somewhere behind the shoes lined up by the door or the smell of rice cooking. He told himself he would find it soon enough. He did not find it that first evening or the next, and by the end of the first week he had almost stopped looking, though he would not have admitted that to anyone. The house itself was small and plain, tatami mats worn soft in the middle of each room, a low table where Emmy set down tea without being asked, and a dog named Pochi who slept most of the day in a stripe of sunlight by the sliding door. Pochi had one ear that never stood up properly, no matter how many times Haruto smoothed it flat and let it go. It was such a small, useless detail, and it was for reasons Haruto could not explain, the first thing in that house that made him laugh out loud. In the mornings, there was the smell of rice steaming and the particular quiet of a house where no one was rushing anyone else out the door, and Haruto would lie in his futon a moment longer than he needed to, just listening before he remembered that no one was timing him. Emmy's cooking ran to plain, warm things, rice balls with dried fish flakes pressed into the middle, a soup that tasted faintly of the sea, nothing that announced itself. Haruto found that this was somehow the most convincing part of the whole arrangement, because no one performing kindness for an audience bothers to make it this ordinary. Kenji worked with his hand somewhere in the city and came home smelling faintly of machine oil, and in the evenings he read the newspaper with his glasses pushed low on his nose, saying very little. Some men say very little not because they have nothing to say, but because they're still deciding how to say it. Haruto watched them both. That first month, the way you watch whether you don't yet trust, waiting for the wind to turn. It never did, and that, more than anything, unsettled him. He had grown so used to being a guest, a temporary arrangement, a name on someone else's calendar, that the plain fact of being fed dinner every night without comment felt, to him, like something that would eventually have to be paid for. So one evening near the end of that first month, after the dishes had been cleared and Pochi had settled with a sigh onto the tatami, Haruto decided that he would fix the one thing that still felt wrong before it grew into something he owed and could not repay. He had thought about how to say it for almost a week, turning the sentence over the way you turn a stone in your pocket, smoothing its edges so it would come out sounding grateful and not like an accusation. What he had decided, lying awake under a borrowed blanket, was that he would find a part-time job somewhere nearby, at a convenience store or a noodle shop, anywhere that would take a 14-year-old for a few hours after school. He would bring the money home each month and set it quietly on the low table as rent. It seemed to him like the only honest thing to do, the only way to make sure that Kenji and Emmy were not simply absorbing him, a stray, the way you might take in a cat that would not stop showing up at your door. He said all of this carefully, sitting very straight at the low table, looking mostly at his own hands while he spoke. He heard his own voice come out steadier than he expected, which he was privately proud of. There was a silence afterward that went on a beat too long, and in it Haruto felt the old, familiar drop in his stomach, the one that told him he had said something wrong again. In that silence, he found himself already rehearsing a smaller, meeker version of the offer, a little less money, a little less pride attached to it. Whatever it would take to smooth this over quietly, the way he had learned to smooth over so many things before. But when Kenji finally spoke, his voice was not cold at all, only louder than Haruto had heard from him before. Loud the way a door sounds when it is thrown open rather than closed. What he said was that Haruto did not need to pay a single yen of rent in this house. Not now, and not ever. And that he could put the whole idea out of his head for good. Kenji told him, leaning forward with both hands flat on the table, that no one under this roof was a boarder. Money changing hand between them would only make him a stranger renting a room, when what Kenji and Emmy actually wanted was something else entirely. Emmy, beside him, was laughing quietly behind one hand, not at Haruto, but at the sight of her husband so worked up over a 14-year-old's polite, well-rehearsed little speech. She told Haruto, gently, that he had clearly practiced that whole thing in his room beforehand, which was true and which made his ears go hot. For a moment, Haruto did not know what to do with his hands or his face, because being scolded for trying to do the right thing was a new kind of scolding, one that did not sting the way the others had. He had braced himself, without quite realizing it, for the conversation to end the way so many others had ended in the years since his parents died, with some quiet, reasonable explanation for why he did not, after all, belong here either. Instead, Kenji sat back, seeming almost embarrassed by how loud he had been. He said that if Haruto wanted to feel useful, if he truly could not sit still knowing he owed something, then fine, he could have chores, real ones, the kind any member of the family would be expected to do. From now on, Kenji said, the dog was his responsibility, morning and evening both, rain or no rain, and so was scrubbing out the bath before anyone got in it. Haruto could consider that his rent, paid in full, forever, and never mentioned again. It was such a small thing to offer, a dog's leash and a bucket and a brush. And yet Haruto sat with it for a long moment before he understood what it actually meant, which was that he was not being asked to earn his place here at all. He was simply being handed a place, the way a place is handed to a son, and the chores were only the shape that the handing over happened to take. In this house, apparently, that was how you said the word family, with a leash and a bucket instead of with the word itself. That same evening, before the last of the light had gone, Haruto took Pochi's leash down from its hook by the door for the first time as something more than a guest doing a favor. The air outside had the particular bite of a January evening in that part of the country, cold enough to feel in his teeth, and Pochi trotted ahead of him with the crooked ear flopping, entirely unaware that anything about this walk was different from any other. Haruto found that he did not mind the cold nearly as much as he expected to. He walked slower than he needed to, passed the same narrow street he had walked once or twice before as a visitor. Only now the houses along it looked different somehow, though nothing about them had actually changed. An elderly neighbor was sweeping her front step under a bare bulb, and she nodded at him the way you nod at someone you have decided belongs on your street. Haruto nodded back before he even realized he had done it. He thought, walking there with the leash looped once around his wrist the way Kenji had shown him, that he'd spent almost 4 years now being moved from place to place like a piece of luggage nobody had quite claimed. Always careful, always polite, always ready to be told that the arrangement had changed. And now here he was, holding a dog's leash on a street he was allowed to think of as his, doing the most ordinary chore in the world, and the ordinariness of it was the thing that undid him a little, right there in the cold. Pochi stopped to investigate something at the base of a telephone pole for a long time, the way dogs do, entirely unhurried, and Haruto stood and let him. He was in no rush at all to get back inside, which is its own kind of small miracle for a boy who had spent so long feeling like a burden that everyone wanted moved along. Above the rooftops, the sky had gone the deep, flat blue at turns just before real dark, 1 or 2 stars already out, and Haruto tipped his head back to look at them the way he used to. He had learned in other houses that looking up too long could make people uneasy about how long you meant to stay. No one here seemed uneasy about anything. He stood a while longer under that darkening sky, just to test whether the feeling would hold, the way you press on a bruise to see if it still hurts. It did not hurt, not that evening, and Haruto let his shoulders drop, an inch he had not even known he was holding. He found himself thinking that a rent payment would have been easy, in a way, a clean transaction, money for shelter, a debt that could be counted and closed. Kenji had refused him precisely that kind of easy arithmetic. What Kenji had given him instead could not be closed out or paid off. A leash to hold every morning and every evening for as long as he lived there. Haruto understood slowly, standing under a street lamp with his breath showing in the cold, that there was no version of this where he finished paying and left. There was only the walking and the bath scrubbed clean before anyone used it, repeated quietly for as long as the two of them were willing to keep him, which, as far as he could tell from the loudness of Kenji's voice at the table, might simply be forever. He let that word sit in his chest for a while, forever, turning it over the way he had turned over his little rehearsed speech about rent. This time he was not trying to smooth its edges, only trying to see if it was really as solid as it seemed. By the time Haruto brought Pochi back inside, the dog's paws were cold and a little damp, and he dried them one at a time with an old towel kept by the door specifically for that purpose. It was a towel that had clearly done this job for years before he ever arrived. Emmy was in the kitchen boiling water for the bath, and she called out without turning around that dinner had a little rice left over if he was hungry again, the same way she might have said it to Kenji or to anyone else who simply lived there. Haruto sat down on the step just inside the door to take off his shoes, and for a moment he simply stayed there, one shoe half off, listening. Water running, a pot lid rattling gently. Kenji somewhere turning the pages of his newspaper. None of it was remarkable, and that was exactly the point. Remarkable things, in Haruto's experience, tended to be the ones that got taken away again, while the small, unremarkable ones, the ones nobody bothered to make a fuss over, were the ones that stayed. He scrubbed the bath that night for the first time, kneeling on the cool tile with the brush Kenji had shown him, taking far longer over it than the task really required. It was not because he did not know how to hurry, but because some part of him wanted to make the chore last, wanted to feel for as long as possible like a boy doing his job in his own house rather than a guest performing a favor. When he finally climbed into the borrowed futon that night, Pochi's leash hung back on its hook by the door, where it would hang every evening after this one, and the bath was clean for the morning. Somewhere down the hall, he could hear Kenji and Emmy talking in low voices about nothing in particular, the way people talk when there is nothing left between them that needs deciding. Haruto lay there in the dark and thought that he still did not fully understand why these two people, who owed him nothing and barely knew him before that January, had decided he was worth keeping, but he had stopped, for tonight at least, looking for the catch. He let himself simply lie there instead, warm under a blanket that was starting, very slowly, to feel like his own, in a house that had quietly stopped asking him to prove that he belonged in it. And somewhere on the other side of the wall, faintly, he could hear Pochi's tail thump twice against the floor, settling in for the night the way he always did, as if to say that as far as the dog was concerned, this arrangement had never been in question at all. Let that moment rest now, soft and unhurried, the way a held breath finally lets go. There is no need to follow it further tonight. Simply let it settle into the quiet, like a stone sinking slowly through still water. If your eyes have already closed, that is all right. The story does not need you awake to keep unfolding. It only asks that you stay near, drifting somewhere close to sleep. The same night is still wrapped around everything we have been describing, patient and unbroken, carrying its people forward without any need to rush. So take one slow breath now and let your shoulders loosen. When you are ready, or even if you're not, we will simply continue gently into what comes next for them. One soft morning, not even a month into living in that quiet house, Haruto came down the stairs and found Kenji and Emmy already sitting at the low table, dressed as if for a wedding, in the pale, milky light before breakfast. In Emmy's hands was a single sheet of paper, creased small and torn a little at one corner, and Haruto knew it at once, because it was the high school course guidance flyer he had folded down to nothing and buried at the bottom of his own bedroom's trash bin weeks before, telling no one. He had thought, at the time, that a thing thrown away in his own room was surely his own business, a small and private matter, the kind of paper a boy could bury and simply let go of. In the other houses he had passed through, no one had ever gone looking for that kind of paper at all, because no one had thought to ask where he meant to go once middle school ended. But there the two of them sat, in their good clothes, at an hour when nobody in that house was usually dressed for anything, and Haruto felt his stomach folding on itself the way it always did whenever the adults in his life quietly decided something about him without asking first. He braced himself. Every other time an adult had gone through his things, in every other house he had passed through before this one, it had ended in a lecture or a long sigh, or that particular tired look he had come to expect from relatives who had taken him in only because no one else would. So he stood in the doorway a moment, the toast going cold somewhere behind him, waiting for whichever version of that look this would turn out to be. Instead, Kenji only held up the flyer and asked, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound ordinary, what time the school wanted them there. It took Haruto a moment to understand that this was not an accusation at all. It was an appointment, and that the two of them had gone looking through his room not to catch him at something, but because they meant to go. He told them the time, quietly, and went to find his uniform, and if his hand were not quite steady buttoning it, he decided there was only the cold in the house, and nothing more. It was his first parent-teacher conference, though of course it was not really his first. There had been others in other years, in other houses, with other guardians who had come only because the school required a signature, and had sat through the whole meeting watching the clock on the wall. This was, he understood slowly, walking between the two of them down the frost-quiet street. The first time anyone had put on their good clothes for it. The morning was cold enough that his breath showed in front of him, small and white, and Emmy kept glancing over at him sideways, as though checking that he was still there, still walking, still real. Kenji walked with his hands jammed deep in his coat pockets, saying nothing at all, which Haruto had already learned in that first month was simply how the man carried nervousness, low in his shoulders and silent. Nobody said very much the whole way there, and Haruto found that he did not mind the quiet, because for once it did not feel like the quiet of people who had run out of things to say to him. The conference room of the school was small and a little too warm, heated by an old kerosene stove ticking away in the corner, with 3 low chairs crowded around a table meant for 2, and 1 window looking out on the bare winter trees of the schoolyard. Haruto's homeroom teacher, a man named Riku, was already there when they arrived, a folder of papers squared neatly on the table in front of him, and he stood halfway out of his seat to greet them, with a formality Haruto had never once seen him use in an ordinary classroom. They sat, the 3 of them crowded onto one side of the table and Riku on the other, and for a long moment nobody spoke, and Haruto studied the faded pattern of the tablecloth as though it might tell him how a thing like this was supposed to go. The room smelled faintly of chalk dust and kerosene smoke, and somewhere down the corridor a door opened and closed, and none of it felt like anything that should matter this much. Rika began, in the end, not with grades, though he had the grades there, printed and ready in the folder, but with a simple observation offered slowly and without any drama at all. He mentioned that Haruto had kept coming to school through more changes of address than most students saw in an entire lifetime, and had kept his mark steady through every single one of them. He said it plainly, the way a man reads a fact off a page, and yet Haruto felt his ears go hot, because no teacher before this one had ever said such a thing out loud, in front of anyone, as though it were simply true and worth stating. Rika went on, unhurried, to say that a boy who studied in libraries because he had nowhere warmer to sit, who moved from school to school and still turned in every assignment on time, was exactly the kind of student that high school existed for. It would be, he noted, a genuine waste to let something like that stop here, at the ordinary end of a middle school, simply because nobody had been in a position to say otherwise before now. And then, without raising his voice at all, without any of the ceremony Haruto might have expected from a moment like this, Riku got to his feet, came around to the near side of the low table, and bowed. Not the quick bow of a greeting in the hallway, not the bow a teacher gives at the start of class out of habit, but a slow and deliberate bow, his back folding down and down until his forehead nearly touched the wood of the table itself. He held it there, asking Kenji and Emi, in that lowered voice people use only when they mean every single word of it, to please let Haruto go on to high school, to please give him at least that much. Haruto sat very still and watched the crown of his teacher's head, which even bent low under the light, seemed to shine faintly beneath the fluorescent tube overhead, catching it the way a coin catches a lamp. It was such a small, ordinary thing to notice at a moment like that, the shine of a balding head under a cheap classroom light, and yet it was the one detail his mind reached for and held on to. Because looking any higher meant looking at the shape of the bow itself, at what it meant that a grown man, a teacher, was folding himself in half over a boy who was not even his own son, and that Haruto could not quite do yet. He felt his eyes sting, and told himself it was only the stove, only the dry, close warmth of the little room pressing against his face, and he kept telling himself that even as the sting refused to go away, no one in all the years since the accident that had taken his parents and his younger brother and his younger sister from him in a single afternoon had ever bowed for him like that, had ever lowered their own head to ask for something on his behalf. Beside him, Emi had gone very quiet, and when Haruto glanced over, her eyes were already wet, though she was doing that thing adults do where they blink hard and stare at the ceiling, as if the tears might simply reconsider and go back where they came from. Kenji, for his part, sat with his arms folded tight across his chest and his jaw set, staring at the still-bowed teacher with an expression Haruto could not quite name, somewhere between offended and deeply moved, as though the two feelings had gotten tangled together on the way to his face. And then Kenji spoke, and what came out of him was not quite what anyone in that overheated little room seemed to be expecting. He said, first, that there was no need for anyone to go bowing like that over something so small, that a teacher lowering his head over a mere high school was, frankly, a bit much for a Tuesday morning. Riku straightened up slowly at that, looking faintly confused, unsure for a moment whether he had somehow given offense in a room where he had only meant to ask a favor. But Kenji was not finished, and he went on in that same flat, gruff voice to say that if they were going to talk about this at all, they might as well talk about it properly and not waste everyone's morning on half measures. This one, he said, meaning Haruto, without once turning to look at him directly, was not going to be stopping at high school at all. He said it almost crossly, the way a man announces something he has already decided somewhere along the walkover and does not intend to discuss any further, that Haruto would be going on to university, full stop, and the school could put that in whatever folder it liked. For a moment, nobody in that small room moved, and Riku, folder still open in front of him, looked between the boy and the man beside him as if trying to work out whether he had heard correctly. Haruto had certainly heard correctly, and something in his chest gave way all at once. the way a held breath finally lets go without anyone deciding it should. A month ago, he had been a stranger sleeping in a spare room, doing chores in exchange for a roof over his head, and now a man he barely knew was deciding out loud in front of a teacher that there would be a university somewhere in his future. He wanted, for a moment, to say that no one had asked him, that this was his own life and his own choice to make, the way he might have said a month before, half joking and half testing whether anyone would take it back if he pushed. He thought, too, of how easily a grown-up's promise could turn out to be nothing at all. How many times before an adult had told him one thing and meant another, and how strange it was that some small part of him still believed this one. But the words did not come, because underneath the old reflex to argue, underneath the boy who had learned to expect nothing and therefore to ask for nothing, there was only a kind of stunned, grateful quiet. It was the quiet of someone being handed a future he had long ago stopped allowing himself to want out loud, even in his own head. Emmy had stopped pretending to look at the ceiling by then, and let the tears go wherever they wanted, dabbing at her face with the sleeve of her good coat, murmuring something about how proud she already was, though the word university had barely finished being said. Riku, recovering himself, mentioned only that he was glad to hear it, that he would note it down properly, and that he suspected this particular student would not need very much pushing at all. There was something almost shy in the way he said it. A teacher quietly admitting that he had perhaps underestimated how far one small meeting could go on an ordinary Tuesday in a room heated by a kerosene stove. Haruto sat between the two people who had, a month before, been almost strangers to him, a woman with wet sleeves and a man who could not stop scowling at his own kindness, and understood, slowly, that something in his life had just been settled that he had never once dared to settle for himself. The walk home afterward was quieter than the walk there had been, though it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something has been decided rather than before it. The cold no longer felt like something to brace against, and Haruto noticed that he had stopped counting his own breath in the air. They passed the same vending machine on the corner they had passed that morning, humming the same faint hum, and it struck Haruto as a small, ordinary miracle that a street could look so completely unchanged while everything inside him felt entirely different. Kenji did not mention the bow again, or the university, or any of it, and instead asked, in his usual flat voice, whether the evening's chores would get done before dinner or after, as though the whole morning had been nothing more than an ordinary errand. Haruto answered that he would see to them before dinner, and found that he was smiling down at the frozen pavement in a way he had no real explanation for, and did not try very hard to find one. That evening, doing his homework at the low table, while Emmy hummed something tuneless from the kitchen and Kenji read the newspaper without really seeming to read it, Haruto found himself thinking that he had spent so many years being passed from one reluctant relative to the next. He had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that a room could simply feel settled, that could hold 3 people who each expected, without needing to say so, to still be there tomorrow. He did not say any of this out loud that night, and no one asked him to, and that, too, felt like its own kind of peace the sort that does not need words in order to be real. And that, perhaps, is where this quiet part of the story comes to rest for tonight. Let that moment rest for a while, just as it was, without needing to be finished or explained. Some feelings arrive quietly and ask only to be sat with. And this is one of them, so there's no need to hurry away from it. If your eyes have already closed, that is all right. The night continues on its own, patient and unbothered by whether you are awake to watch it. Take one slow breath in and let it go even more slowly, feeling your body settle a little deeper into wherever you are resting. The same story is still breathing around us, quietly reshaping itself, carrying its people forward through the hours a little further, a little gentler, toward whatever comes next. In a quiet house near the edge of a small town, a high school boy named Haruto stood alone in the narrow yard behind the kitchen, swinging a bamboo practice sword through the cooling evening air. He was 17 now, though it was easy to forget how young that still was, watching him move through the same 4 strikes over and over, slow and steady, like someone counting his own heartbeat. This was the boy who had been handed from relative to relative before 2 kind strangers finally kept him. And here he was now, alone in a yard he could call his own, choosing entirely on his own to get good at something. Nobody was making him do this. The sword had come from the high school's Kendo club, a room he had wandered into almost by accident, the way tired boys sometimes wander into rooms simply because the door happened to be open that day, and he had never quite wandered back out. There was something about the stillness of it that he liked, the long quiet before a strike, the way a whole match could turn on half a second of patience. He told himself, at first, that it was only something to do with his afternoons, a way to avoid going home to an empty room the way he used to, back before there was a Kenji and an Emmy waiting there with the lights already on. But it became more than that before long. He practiced before school in the yard, when the neighborhood was still gray and half asleep, and he practiced again after dinner, until Emmy would open the kitchen door and remind him, gently, that the neighbors were trying to sleep too. His grades held steady through all of it, mostly because he studied the same way he swung the sword, in patient, repeated motions at the low table in his room with the lamp pulled close and his knees folded under him on the tatami. Kenji would pass by his door some nights and say nothing at all, just stand there a moment in the hallway, the way a man does when he is proud of something and does not yet have the words for it. Emmy kept a small notebook by the kitchen where she wrote down the dates of his practice matches, in handwriting far too careful for something so ordinary, as though she were keeping the school calendar of a child she had known since he was small, instead of one she had known for barely 2 years. That first spring, and the one after it, he did not win much. He usually lost in the second round, sometimes the third if the day went well, and he came to accept this the way a person accepts weather, without much complaint, because everyone around him seemed to have started the sport years earlier in elementary school dojos with proper teachers, while he was only just catching up to the rest of the world in almost everything. But by his second year, something in the timing of his strikes had settled, the way a voice settles when a boy stops being afraid of how it sounds. And by early autumn of that year, the coach began entering him in the better brackets. The prefectural tournament that autumn was held in a gymnasium 2 towns over, the kind of building that always smells faintly of floor wax and old wood no matter the season. And Haruto walked into it that morning with his bag over one shoulder and his stomach in a tight, quiet knot. Kenji and Emi had taken the morning off, both of them, which they almost never did together. And they sat near the back of the bleachers in their ordinary clothes, looking a little out of place among the other families who seemed to know exactly how loud one was allowed to be. Haruto won his first match without much trouble, and his second one by a narrower margin. And by the time he stepped onto the floor for the quarterfinal, he could hear, somewhere behind the general noise of the hall, a voice that was unmistakably Kenji's, a little too loud for the room, calling his name like it was the only word he knew. He would say later that he had never been so embarrassed in his life, and that he had never once considered asking them to be quieter. He won the quarterfinal. In the semifinal, he faced a boy from a school known for its Kendo, a boy who moved like he had been born already holding a sword, and Haruto lost that match by the smallest possible margin. One clean strike that the boy landed a half second before Haruto's own strike would have landed the other way. It should have felt like nothing, a runner-up finish, a silver placing that nobody outside that gymnasium would ever ask about again. And for a moment, bowing to his opponent with his breath still ragged in his chest, that was exactly how it felt. Then he looked up toward the bleachers, and he found Emi with both hands pressed over her mouth, and Kenji standing, actually standing among rows of seated parents, clapping in a way that had nothing at all to do with how the match had ended. Later, walking out to the parking lot, Emi told him that she did not think she had breathed properly for the entire second round, and Kenji admitted, a little sheepishly, that he might have said something during the semifinal that he could not fully remember and would rather not have repeated to him. Haruto only shook his head at both of them, the way a boy does when he is trying very hard not to smile in front of people who have just embarrassed him thoroughly in public, and failing. That night, there was a proper dinner, more dishes on the low table than the 3 of them usually bothered with on an ordinary Tuesday, and Emi had even made the rice the way he liked it best, with just a little extra of the katsuobushi and salted salmon flake through it. The 2 of them mixed together like something out of an old family recipe that had never actually existed before she invented it for him. Kenji, who almost never touched alcohol, poured himself a small cup of sake before the meal was even finished, and by the second cup his face had gone a warm shade of pink, and by the third he was laughing at almost nothing, the low, easy laugh of a man who has decided, just for one evening, to let himself feel exactly as happy as he actually is. At some point he tried, in his loosened state, to pour a splash of the sake in a Haruto's own cup, insisting that a boy who fought that well in a semi-final had certainly earned one small taste, and Emi caught his wrist halfway through the pour with a look that needed no words at all attached to it. Kenji withdrew the bottle at once, looking, for just a moment, like a boy caught at something himself, and Haruto laughed so hard at the sight of it that he nearly choked on his rice, which only made Emi laugh too, in spite of herself. It occurred to Haruto, sitting there in the lamplight with rice on his chin and the sound of his foster parents bickering gently over a cup of sake, that this was what people meant probably when they used the word family, a word he had stopped trusting sometime around the age of 10, and had only slowly carefully begun to trust again in this particular house. He did not say any of that out loud that night. He simply passed Kenji another helping of rice and let the evening go on being exactly as ordinary and as warm as it already was. The years after that folded into each other the way school years do, each one feeling both endless and gone before he had quite noticed it leaving, and almost without him deciding it. The Kendo practice and the quiet hours of the low table became the two fixed points around which everything else in his days arranged itself. By his final year, the tournaments mattered less to him than the studying did, though he kept the Kendo up anyway, some evenings simply to clear the static out of his own head before sitting back down his books, the way other people might go for a walk or run a bath. He had decided somewhere along the way that he wanted to go to a national university, one of the harder ones to get into, and he wanted to study law, with a plan so far off and so oddly specific that he told almost no one about it. Not out of shyness exactly, but because it felt like something too fragile to say out loud before it was real. He studied the way he had once swung that bamboo sword in the cold morning yard, in long patient repetitions, until the numbers on the practice exams began, slowly, to move in the direction he needed them to move. Emmy began to worry about him properly that final year, in the particular way that mothers worry, though she was careful never to use that word for herself, and she started leaving small plates of food outside his door at night, rice balls mostly, the same combination of salted salmon and bonito flakes she had made him after the tournament, as if good food alone might hold a growing boy together through all of it. More than once she told him, in the doorway of his room with the light from the hall behind her, that a national university was not the only kind of future worth having, and that she would love him exactly the same either way, whether or not he got in anywhere at all. He only ever answered her with something close to a smile, because he had already decided, quietly and stubbornly, that he was going to get in, and it did not feel like the moment to argue with her kindness, only to let it sit there, warm, while he went on studying anyway. He lost weight that year, without entirely meaning to, 6 kilograms in all, which Emmy noticed before he did, and which worried her more than she ever quite said, though she took to leaving slightly larger portions after that, and to standing in his doorway a little longer than she used to. He would say afterward that it had felt, at the time, less like suffering and more like training, the same kind of patient discomfort he had learned to sit with in a gymnasium 2 towns over, except the opponent this time was only a stack of practice exams, and the small, familiar voice in his own head that liked to remind him where he had come from. That voice never once told him he could not do this. It only ever told him, quietly, that he had already survived worse mornings than this one. The exam itself, when it finally came, felt strangely small compared to the months that had led up to it, over almost before he had adjusted to being afraid of it. And then there was nothing left to do but wait, which turned out to be the hardest part of all. The results arrived on an ordinary weekday afternoon, in a plain envelope that Haruto could not quite bring himself to open at first, holding it at the kitchen table while Kenji and Emmy tried, not very successfully, to look as though they were not watching him. When he finally read the single line that told him he had been accepted, he did not shout or laugh or do any of the things he might have imagined doing. He only sat very still for a moment, the way he used to sit still before a strike, letting the news settle all the way down into him. Then he looked up and found that Emmy was already crying, one hand pressed flat against her chest, and that Kenji had turned toward the window, blinking hard at nothing in particular, the way a man does when he does not want anyone to see his face just yet. That night, the three of them ate a simple dinner. Nothing as elaborate as the one after the tournament. Just rice and grilled fish and the ordinary quiet of a house where everyone already knew how happy everyone else was and did not feel the need to say so loudly. Kenji did pour himself one small cup of sake, out of what he called, without much shame, a father's proper right to celebrate, and Emmy let him have it this time, without any objection at all. Haruto sat between them at the low table, full and tired in the particular way that only comes after a long fight finally won, and thought, not for the first time, that whatever this house was, whatever word eventually came to fit it, it had already become the only home he wanted. Outside, the evening settled over the quiet street the way it always did, unhurried, and the light in the kitchen stayed on a little longer than usual that night, warm against the dark. Let that moment rest for a while, just as it is. There is no need to follow it any further tonight. It can stay soft at the edge of things, half remembered already, the way a held breath slowly lets itself go. We stay with them a little longer, quiet, unhurried, the night settling more deeply around every word that has been spoken. If your eyes have closed, that is all right. The story does not need you awake to keep unfolding gently. Take a slow breath in and let it out even slower. And when you are ready, or even if you are not, we drift onward together, further into the same long night, the same story continuing softly into what comes next. Late in the evening, in a small university room that finally belonged to him and to no one else, a young man named Haruto sat cross-legged on a narrow bed with an old telephone resting on his knee, its cord stretched all the way across the room from the wall, and he had already picked up the receiver and set it down again more times than he wanted to admit. He was 19 that autumn, a first-year student with a narrow shelf of second-hand law textbooks, a desk lamp that hummed very faintly if you sat still enough to listen for it, and a small pencil address book his father had written out for him before he left home, each name printed slowly and carefully, the way you write something you want a tired person to be able to read at a glance. The room smelled faintly of instant noodles and new paper. For the first time in his life, nobody was waiting up to ask him where he had been, and no bell or curfew or worried adult decided which door he walked through each morning. And Haruto had found this so unfamiliar at first that he simply wandered the campus after his last class most days, in no particular hurry. The way a person walks when they are still quietly checking that a good thing is real and not about to be taken back from them. He chose his own classes that term, which felt like a strange kind of luxury after years of timetables other people had drawn up on his behalf, and alongside the constitutional law he actually needed, he had signed up almost on a whim for a small lecture course on the history of rivers. It would not help him become a lawyer, which was the whole plan his first year had been built around. But it sat in his chest like something he had personally earned, a class chosen for no reason except that he wanted it. and some nights he would lie on the thin mattress and turn that fact over slowly, the way a person turns a stone over in their pocket, just to feel its shape again. It was on one of those quiet nights, listening to someone 2 doors down laughing softly at a radio program, that Haruto found himself thinking about a promise he had made to no one out loud, years before, in a cramped middle school teacher's room that had always smelled of chalk dust and cold, forgotten tea. The promise was small, and it went something like this: that if he ever made it somewhere, if the long, unsteady road he had been walking since he was a boy ever led him on a solid ground, he would telephone the one teacher who had gone to bat for him when almost nobody else in his life had bothered to. That teacher's name was Riku. Haruto let himself drift back there for a moment, the way a person eases into a warm bath, and he found he could still see Riku almost exactly as he had been then, a thin man in a jacket a size too large for him, kneeling on the floor of a small meeting room with his forehead lowered nearly to the low table in front of Haruto's father. He remembered how strange it had felt at 15 to watch a grown man bow that low on his behalf. A boy who had changed schools so many times by then that most teachers learned his name only well enough to forget it again within a term or two. Riku had not forgotten him. Riku had told Haruto's father, in a voice that did not waver even while his back stayed bent, that this particular boy had gone on studying through more than anyone his age should ever have had to carry alone, and that whatever it cost, he deserved to be allowed to keep going all the way through high school and beyond it. Nobody had ever spoken for Haruto quite like that before. He remembered, too, the ordinary, almost funny details that cling to a memory like that without being asked to: the afternoon light coming low through the window, the smell of the tea going cold in 3 untouched cups, the sound of his own heart going strangely loud in his ears while 2 adults decided, gently and firmly, that his life was worth arguing over. At the time, he had not known what to do with a feeling that large, so he had simply sat there, saying nothing, letting it happen to him the way weather happens to a person standing outside. It had taken years, in truth, for Haruto to understand what that afternoon had actually cost Riku, a teacher with no particular reason to fight for a transfer student who would likely be gone again within a year, and no guarantee that the fight would even work. But it had worked, and here he was. So there, in his own small room with his own chosen books on the shelf, Haruto sat up straighter, found the number in the careful pencil handwriting his father had left him, and dialed it before he could talk himself into believing it was too late in the evening to be calling anyone at all. The line rang once, then twice, long enough for Haruto to consider hanging up and trying again some other, braver night, long enough for his heart to do something faintly foolish in his chest. Then there was a small click, and a familiar voice, a little older sounding than he remembered it, said hello in the flat, tired way of someone who has just come in from the cold. It was Riku. Haruto had planned, in the careful way people plan things that make them nervous, to say something calm and grown up, something like, "Good evening, Sensei. I hope this is not too late an hour to be calling." But what actually came out of him was closer to a stumble, a quick, breathless run of words about a university and a small room, and of all things, a class about rivers. Riku laughed, gently, the way a person laughs when they're trying to give someone else room to catch their breath, and told him to slow down and asked him quite simply whether he was well. Haruto said that he was. And then, because there did not seem to be a smaller way of saying it, he told Riku plainly that he had been accepted, that he was at university now, studying toward becoming a lawyer, in a program that most of the boys and girls from his old homeroom would have needed something close to a miracle to reach. There was a silence on the line after that, though it was not an empty silence, it was a full one, the kind that has something moving quietly through it, and it went on just long enough that Haruto asked in a smaller voice whether Riku was still there. When Riku's voice came back, it was thick and uneven, and it took Haruto a moment to understand what he was hearing, that the man on the other end of the line was crying. Not the neat, cinematic crying of film, but the real, ragged kind, the kind that catches somewhere behind the nose and comes out in broken pieces. A grown man weeping on the telephone because of him. Riku apologized for it between breaths, said he did not quite know why his eyes had gone like this, that he was an old man now, and old men cried more easily than they used to over things that caught them off guard. And Haruto, listening, realized that his own eyes had gone warm and blurred as well, there in that small dormitory room with its humming lamp and its smell of instant noodles and new paper. He thought, holding the receiver a little tighter against his ear, of that low table again, of a forehead nearly touching worn wood, of a teacher who had bet something of himself on a transfer student nobody else had bothered to learn the name of, and he understood properly, maybe for the first time, that the bet had been real and that it had cost Riku something to make it. Some debts, it turns out, are paid back in a single phone call. Once his voice had steadied a little, Riku told him that he had wondered about him for years, had asked around quietly now and then whether anyone had heard how the transfer boy from his old homeroom had gotten on in life, and had never once managed to find out, and had told himself, without much evidence to stand on, that it had probably gone well for him somewhere. Now, he had evidence, he said, and something in the way he said the word made it sound almost too heavy for him to hold steady in his own mouth. Haruto wanted very badly to say something worthy of the moment, something about how he would not be sitting in that room at all, would not have a shelf of his own books or a class about rivers or any of it, if a stranger in a jacket a size too large had not knelt on a hard floor and spoken up for him when it would have been so much easier to say nothing. What actually came out was much smaller, just a quiet thank you, said twice because once did not feel like enough to carry the weight of it. Rika told him he did not need thanking. He said that watching a child he had taught for a single difficult year grow into someone like this was, for a teacher, close to the entire point of the job, closer than any of the ordinary lessons about grammar or history that filled up most of the hours, and that Haruto had just handed him, in one short telephone call, the best evening he could remember having in a very long while. They talked a while longer after that, about smaller things, the way people do once the heaviest sentence in a conversation has already been spoken and there's a kind of ease left sitting in its place. They talked about the price of curry at the dormitory cafeteria and about Riku's back, which still ached whenever the weather turned wet, and about the river Haruto was reading about for that class he had chosen for no better reason, he admitted, than that its name had sounded peaceful to him. Riku said that sounded like a perfectly good reason to choose a class. He asked, gently, whether Haruto was eating properly and whether the winters in his new city were as unkind as the ones back home, and whether he had made any friends yet among the other students. And Haruto answered each question slowly, aware, somewhere under the words, that this was simply what it felt like to have someone worry over him in the ordinary, unremarkable way that people worry over those they love. He was not used to that feeling yet, not entirely, but he found that he did not mind sitting inside it for a while. Before they said goodnight, Riku told him, in a voice that had gone soft and steady again, that he should call another time as well, not only when there was good news worth reporting, and Haruto promised that he would, meaning it in the quiet, half-frightened way a person means a promise they are not yet certain they will be brave enough to keep. When the call finally ended, Haruto set the receiver back into its cradle and sat there a while longer with his hand resting on top of it, as though it might still be warm. The dormitory room was very quiet around him, the desk lamp humming its small, familiar hum, the shelf of second-hand law books catching the light at an angle that made their spines look almost golden. He did not feel like crying anymore. He felt, instead, something steadier than that, a kind of settled warmth sitting low in his chest, the feeling of a debt not erased, exactly because some debts are not the sort that ever fully clear but acknowledged, carried forward gently now, instead of packed away somewhere unspoken. It was, he thought, a little like carrying a small stone in your pocket for years, simply because of whose hand had first placed it there. Outside his window, the campus had gone quiet for the night, the last few lights in the other rooms winking out one by one. And somewhere across the country, in a house Haruto had not seen in years, an old teacher was probably still sitting beside his own telephone, a little embarrassed at himself, a little pleased with himself, wiping his glasses on his sleeve and smiling faintly at nothing in particular. And that, for tonight, is a fine enough place to leave the two of them, one young man settling slowly in his sleep with a shelf of his own books nearby, and one old teacher, somewhere far off, still glad all the way down to his bones. Let that moment rest for a little while, just as it is, without needing to be resolved right away. There is no rush here, no need to hurry toward what comes next. Take a slow breath if you like, and let your shoulders soften into whatever is holding you right now. The night is still unfolding quietly, patiently, the same story carrying itself forward in its own time. We stay with these people a little longer, letting their feelings settle like dust after rain, before we drift onward together into what happens next. Nothing needs your attention right now. You can simply listen or let your eyes close completely. And either way, the story will keep gently moving beneath you toward its next quiet turn. Haruto was sitting on a hard plastic chair in a hospital corridor one ordinary afternoon in his third year of college, waiting for someone to come out and tell him what had happened to Emmy. Kenji sat beside him, very still, his big hands folded so tightly in his lap that the knuckles had gone pale, and neither of them had said very much since the phone call that morning. The call had come in the middle of a lecture on constitutional law, of all things, and Haruto had left his notebook open on the desk and walked straight out without a word to anyone. He remembered almost nothing of the train ride after that, only the strange feeling of watching the ordinary world keep going past the window, people reading, people sleeping, as if nothing at all were wrong. A nurse had told him only that Emmy had collapsed at the vegetable stand near the house, and that a neighbor had called the ambulance, and that they would need to wait for the doctor. Haruto found himself doing a kind of quiet arithmetic in his head, the way he had as a boy, counting up everyone he had already lost and hoping the number did not need to grow any larger. He had lost his parents when he was 9, his brother and sister with them, and then his grandfather not long after, and somewhere in all that counting, he had learned to expect very little from the world. But these last years in the house with Emmy and Kenji had been so ordinary and so warm that he had almost let himself stop counting. When the doctor finally came out, he was a tired-looking man with round glasses, and he spoke to Kenji first in the low, even voice doctors use when the news is not good. Haruto heard the word stomach, and then he heard a longer word after it, and the hallway seemed to tilt very slightly, though nothing in it had actually moved. He would learn later that this was called stomach cancer, and that it had likely been there, quiet and unnoticed, for longer than any of them wanted to think about. Kenji did not say anything for a long moment, and then he only nodded once, the way he nodded at everything difficult, as though nodding might make the difficulty smaller. A nurse led them down the corridor to a room with a curtain pulled halfway across it, and there, propped up on 2 thin pillows, was Emmy, looking smaller than Haruto had ever seen her look. The evening sun was coming in low through the narrow window, orange and heavy, and it caught the plastic tubing of the 4-line and made it glow faintly against her arm. And here was the strange thing, the thing Haruto would remember for the rest of his life, that the very first thing Emmy said before anything else was to ask whether he had been keeping up with his studying. Not "Are you frightened?" Not "What did the doctor say to you?" But studying, as if she had simply woken from an ordinary nap and picked the conversation back up exactly where it had left off that morning. Haruto felt something rise in his throat at that, something that was half a laugh and half an entirely different thing. And he told her quietly that of course he had, that she really did underestimate him. It was an old joke between them by then, this business of her underestimating him, going all the way back to when she used to worry he wouldn't manage the entrance exams, and he had managed them easily. She smiled at that, a small tired smile, and said that she supposed she would never learn. Haruto pulled the plain chair close to the bed and sat down, and for a while he simply held her hand, which felt lighter than he remembered, the skin thin and a little cool under his fingers. He wanted, very badly, to ask her whether she was afraid, and whether it hurt, and what the doctor had really meant by all those long, careful words. But somehow none of it would come out of his mouth. Instead, he asked her if she was hungry, if the hospital food was as bad as everyone always said it was, and she told him that it was, in fact, worse. Kenji stood near the window with his arms folded, looking out at the parking lot below, and every so often he would clear his throat, though there was nothing in particular that needed clearing. Haruto understood, without either of them ever having to explain it, that the two of them were doing the exact same thing, which was trying very hard not to let the tears come, in front of Emmy or each other. The low sun through the window did them both a great kindness that evening, because it was bright enough and low enough and orange enough that either man could blink and wipe at his eyes and blame it entirely on the light. Haruto sat there and let his mind drift, just slightly, to all the small, ordinary evenings that had come before this one. The smell of dinner cooking, the particular quiet of the house once the dishes were done and put away. He thought about how he had once believed, as a boy passed from relative to relative, that a family was simply a thing that got taken away from you, sooner or later, without any warning at all. And here he was again, it seemed, sitting in a room that smelled of antiseptic and old flowers, waiting to find out how much more time he would be allowed to keep this one. He did not say any of this out loud, of course, because Emmy was watching him with the same sharp, gently amused eyes she always had, the ones that seemed to know exactly what he was thinking anyway. She told him, in that same light, teasing voice, that he had better not go getting all serious and gloomy on her, because gloomy suited him even less than it suited her. Haruto managed something close to a laugh at that, though it came out a little cracked in the middle, and he told her that he wasn't gloomy, he was simply tired, which was true enough in its own way. A nurse came in quietly to check the machines beside the bed, and for a few minutes none of them spoke, listening instead to the small, steady beeping and the soft squeak of her shoes on the floor as she moved around. When she had gone again, Emmy asked Kenji, in an almost businesslike tone, whether he had remembered to feed himself anything since the morning, and Kenji admitted, a little sheepishly, that he had not. And so, even lying in a hospital bed with a diagnosis none of them had asked for, Emmy found herself worrying about the two men in the room rather than about herself, which struck Haruto as somehow exactly like her. He thought, sitting there in the fading light, that he had spent years imagining what it would take to become the kind of person who could protect other people, a lawyer, he had told her once, someone who stood up for people like him. But here, in this small room, none of that felt like it was worth very much at all, because there was no argument he could make, no clever plan he could build that would change one single word of what the doctor had said. All he could do, it seemed, was sit in the chair and hold her hand and let the sun go down slowly outside the window while she teased him gently about his studying. Later, when visiting hours were almost over, a young nurse came to tell them, apologetically, that they would need to let Emmy rest, and Kenji stood up first, stretching his back with a small groan, the way he always did after sitting too long. Haruto did not want to let go of her hand, not yet, and so he held it another moment and told her, in a voice that came out steadier than he expected, that he would come back again tomorrow, straight after his last class. Emmy told him that he did not need to rush on her account, that she was not going anywhere, and there was something in the way she said it, light and certain, that Haruto chose, that evening, simply to believe. Out in the hallway, the fluorescent lights had come on properly now, cool and white, replacing the last of the orange sun that had been doing them both such a favor all evening. Kenji put a hand on Haruto's shoulder, heavy and warm, the same hand that had once hauled him up by the collar for shouting too loudly in another house. on another difficult evening, though this time it simply rested there and said nothing at all. They walked to the elevator together without speaking, and it was only once the doors had closed, sealing them into that small metal box alone, that either of them let his breath go properly, all at once, like something finally set down after being carried too long. Kenji said quietly that the doctors these days were very good, and that Emmy was stronger than she looked, and Haruto agreed with him, because it seemed like the only thing worth saying, and because some part of him wanted very much for it to be true. Neither of them mentioned the word they had heard in the corridor again that whole evening, not on the elevator, not on the walk to the station, not on the quiet train ride home through the darkening streets. It sat between them anyway, the way such words do, unspoken but entirely present, riding home with them like a third passenger neither one wanted to acknowledge out loud. That night, back in the house that had somehow, over the years, become simply home, Haruto lay awake a long time, listening to Kenji moving quietly around the kitchen, unable, it seemed, to sleep either. He thought about the arithmetic he had done in the hospital corridor, all the counting of everyone he had lost, and he made himself a small, private promise that whatever came next, he would not let fear make him waste a single ordinary evening they still had left. He thought of Emmy's voice asking about his studying before she asked about anything else, and he found, to his own surprise, that it made him smile there in the dark, rather than cry. There would be more doctors and more waiting rooms, and more low afternoon light through hospital curtains in the months that lay ahead of him, though Haruto did not know yet how many, or how little time there truly was. For tonight, though, he let himself hold on to the one steady thing he did know, which was that she was still there, teasing him gently, worrying about whether Kenji had eaten exactly as she always had. And so he closed his eyes at last, in the quiet dark of the house, and let that small steady fact carry him gently towards sleep. Let that moment rest now, just as it was, without needing to be finished or explained. There is no hurry here, and nothing more is required of you than to keep breathing slowly in and out, letting your shoulders soften a little further into whatever is holding you up tonight. We stay with them a little longer in the quiet that follows, before the night carries us gently onward. The same story keeps breathing around us, unhurried, the way a slow tide settles once everything has finally gone still. If your eyes have already closed, that's all right. The words will keep drifting past you like a low current, asking nothing of you, only offering somewhere soft to rest your attention while the next part of their night quietly begins to take shape. 6 months after that first afternoon in the hospital corridor, the room where Emmy was resting still smelled faintly of soap and clean linen, and the evening light through the window had gone soft and low. She had gone in for surgery on her stomach, something the doctors had called serious but manageable, and for a little while it had actually seemed to be going that way. Haruto had taken to visiting after his evening lectures most nights, dragging his bag of notes along with him, because even from a hospital bed, Emmy wanted to know whether he had eaten, whether he was sleeping enough, whether he was still doing that thing where he studied until his eyes went red. He had told her more than once, that a person could probably die from worrying this much about somebody else. And she had laughed at that, a small tired laugh, and told him that worrying was simply what she did instead of sitting still. That evening she asked, first thing, whether his exams were going all right. And when he told her they were fine, she said she still thought he was working too hard, which by then was an old joke between them, worn soft and comfortable as an old coat. A nurse came by to check on her, wrote something on a chart, and left again, and the corridor outside had gone quiet in that particular way hospital corridors do late at night. Footsteps softened, voices dropped almost to nothing. Haruto had brought a blanket from home, because the visitor's couch beside her bed was narrow and a little cold, and he set himself up there the way he had most nights that week, close enough to hear her breathing across the dark. He remembered thinking, right before sleep took him, that she looked better than she had in weeks, some of the color back in her face, her hands resting easy on top of the blanket instead of gripping it. He thought that maybe, in a little while, all of this would just be something they talked about later, a bad month they had gotten through together. He fell asleep on that thought, and he would turn it over in his mind for years afterward, the plain, ordinary kindness of it, and how little it had known. What happened that night happened quietly, the way the worst nights sometimes do, without a raised voice, without a crash, without anything at all that might have woken a sleeping boy an arm's length away. Somewhere in her sleep, her body failed her in a small and cruel way, and by the time anyone understood what was happening, it had already been decided. Haruto slept through all of it. He would carry that arm's length with him for a long time, turning it over on quiet nights, unable to make it mean anything other than what it plainly meant. In the morning, the room was full of people who had no business being there so early. Nurses moving a hush that told him everything before a single word was said. Someone spoke to him gently, and he heard maybe half of it, and the half he heard was enough. He would say much later that grief like that does not arrive the way people expect, all at once and enormous. It arrives in pieces, a little at a time, so a person can carry it without being crushed flat on the very first day. That first day, mostly what he felt was a strange, flat quiet, as if someone had turned the volume down on the whole world and simply forgotten to turn it back up again. The days that followed moved past him the way a station platform moves past a train window, close and blurred and somehow not entirely real, and before he understood how it had happened, it was the day of the funeral. The temple was small and cool and smelled of incense. A thin gray thread of smoke rising steady from the burner near the altar, and a photograph of Emmy sat propped in a soft frame among white chrysanthemums. Haruto stood beside Kenji through most of it, in a black suit that did not quite fit him yet, watching people he barely knew bow toward a photograph of a woman most of them had not spoken a word to in years. It turned out that a death in the family brings out relatives the way rain brings out mushrooms, sudden and unasked for, all of them claiming some old connection nobody had ever mentioned before. Haruto noticed in the flat, distant way grief lets a person notice things, that some of them seemed less interested in Emmy than in whatever it was she might have left behind. One of her older cousins, a woman named Yuki whom Haruto had met perhaps twice in his life, stood near the incense table with two others and talked in the low, careless voice people use when they think no one nearby is really listening. She said that Emmy had always been a difficult woman, and that taking in some stranger's child at her age had been a foolish thing to do, and that a boy like that, in a way she did not trouble herself to soften, seemed to carry misfortune into whatever house was unlucky enough to hold him. Haruto heard it and felt something in his chest go very still and very cold, and he did not trust himself to answer, not with his hands shaking the way they were. He did not have to. Kenji had heard it too, from a few feet away, and for the first time in all the month Haruto had known him, his foster father's voice rose, just once, low and hard and entirely unlike him. He said, slow and level and final, that the person who had just spoken about his son was free to say it once more to his face or to hold her tongue in this room for the rest of the day. And then, more quietly, that Emmy had spent her whole life taking care of people who had no other claim on her at all, and that anyone who could not stand at her funeral and be grateful for that was welcome to leave the room. The temple went very quiet after that. Quiet in the particular way a room goes when everyone in it has just remembered exactly where they are. Even the priest, who had paused mid-chant, seemed to understand that nothing more needed to be added to what had just been said. Yuki did not speak again that day, and the other relatives found other places to stand, and Kenji did not raise his voice a second time. Haruto would remember that moment for the rest of his life, not because it changed anything about the loss itself, but because of the small, quiet thing it told him about the man now standing beside him. He found himself thinking, watching Kenji's shoulders slowly come back down, that here was a man who had already lost one wife to illness years before any of this, and who was now standing at the funeral of a second, and had still found, somewhere in himself, the steadiness to defend her. It was a small thing, set inside a very large sadness, but it settled into Haruto the way a stone settles to the bottom of still water, and it stayed there. Afterward, at the crematorium, the family gathered in a small clean room with pale walls and waited the way families do at such times, without quite knowing what to do with their hands. When it was time, an attendant brought out a tray, and Haruto understood, in a way that felt both expected and completely impossible, that this was Emmy now, all of her, resting in fragments the color of old ivory. In Japan, the family gathers the bones together at a time like this, passing them gently from one pair of chopsticks to another, starting at the feet and moving slowly upward, so that the very last to be placed are the small bones nearest the top, closest to the mind that had spent so many years worrying over him. Haruto had heard of this custom before, distantly, the way a person hears about customs that belong to somebody else's grief, and he had never once imagined that he would be the one holding the chopsticks. His hands are not steady. The bones were smaller and lighter than he had expected, so light that for a moment he could not quite believe there was a whole person in front of him, a whole life of worrying and feeding him and laughing at his bad jokes, reduced now to something he could lift on two thin sticks of wood. He felt his throat close before any sound came out of it, and he understood, in a distant sort of way, that this was what people meant when they said grief catches in the throat, because that was exactly where his had gone and stayed. Kenji stood across from him at the same tray, and their eyes met once, over what was left of her, and neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing left to say that the moment itself was not already saying. When it was finished, an urn sat where the tray had been, wrapped in white cloth, small and plain and final, in a room that had gone very quiet indeed. Haruto thought, standing there, of the afternoon his junior high teacher had once shown Kenji a crumpled sheet of paper about his future. Two adults arguing gently over whether a boy they barely knew deserved to go to university, and how impossibly far away that afternoon now felt. He thought of the rice balls Emmy used to make him, salmon and bonito flakes pressed together with her own hands, and of how he would never again come home late from the library to find one waiting for him, still faintly warm on the kitchen counter. He did not cry loudly that day, not in front of all those relatives, not even here with the urn still faintly warm in front of him. The crying came later, alone, in small private moments that caught him without warning for months afterward, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, over nothing at all. But something in him had already begun, quietly, to change shape around the loss, the way a tree grows slowly around a nail driven into its trunk, not healing exactly, only continuing to live with it held inside. That night, back at a house that no longer had Emmy's voice in it, Haruto and Kenji sat together on the back step for a long while without speaking, the way people do when words would only get in the way of what they actually mean. The house behind them was too quiet, missing all the small sounds she used to make without either of them ever noticing, the kettle, her slippers on the floor, her voice from the next room asking whether he had eaten yet. Neither of them tried to fill that quiet with anything false or comforting. Somehow, that was its own kind of comfort. Two people willing simply to sit inside the same sadness together, rather than pretend, for each other's sake, that it was smaller than it was. Haruto did not know it yet, not fully, but something had shifted that day, first at the temple, in the moment Kenji had raised his voice for a woman neither of them could protect anymore, and then again at the crematorium, in the quiet moment their eyes had met over the last of her. He was beginning, without any words for it yet, to understand what this tired, steady man had actually become to him, and what he might, one day, if he ever found the courage, allow himself to call him. For now, though, it was enough to sit together on the step in the cooling dark, side by side, and let the quiet be shared instead of lonely. And that, for one long and difficult day, was as much peace as either of them had room left to hold. Let that moment rest now, just as it was, without needing anything more from it tonight. There's no hurry to move past it. You can simply let it settle, like a slow breath released. The night stays wide and unbroken around us, and the story keeps breathing quietly in the background, waiting for you rather than pulling at you. If your eyes have grown heavy, that's all right. You don't need to follow every word to stay with this. Take a slow breath in and let it go, and let your shoulders soften into whatever is holding you now. We stay together a little longer, easy and unrushed, as this same night settles gently onward. Late one evening, some weeks after the funeral, A young man named Haruto let himself in through the low wooden gate of the only home he had ever fully belonged to. The house belonged to his foster father, a man named Kenji, though by now Haruto had long stopped thinking of it as anyone's house but his own, and what he noticed first, stepping into the entryway, was that none of the lamps had been switched on. It was deep winter, the kind of cold that made the wood of the floor sting faintly through his socks, and his breath came out of him in small, pale clouds even before he had taken off his coat. Somewhere in the house, there should have been the small, ordinary sounds of an evening, a kettle, a television murmuring to itself, and there were none of those sounds at all. He stood in the dark hallway for a moment, listening. He had never once, in all the years he had lived under this roof, called the man who owned it anything warmer than the careful, distant words a boy uses for someone he is grateful to and slightly afraid of. And tonight, without quite deciding to, he had already begun to feel that this was going to be different. He found Kenji out on the engawa, the narrow wooden veranda that ran along the back of the house, sitting with the glass door slid a little way open to the garden, which was foolish in this cold, and which Kenji must have known was foolish, and had done anyway. There was a small photograph propped on the low table beside him, and a cup of barley tea long since gone cold, a thin skin already forming on its surface. The garden beyond the open door was just bare winter branches and a stone lantern nobody had lit in months, and beyond that, nothing but a sky the color of old ash. What struck Haruto, more than the cold or the dark, was how small Kenji's back looked from behind, the shoulders folded in on themselves the way paper folds when it has been wet and dried too many times, and he stood in the doorway for a long moment without being noticed at all. Kenji was talking very quietly to no one that Haruto could see, and it took a moment for him to understand that Kenji was talking to the photograph in the low, unhurried voice of a man who did not expect an answer and had made his peace with that. "You did well," he was saying. "You did so well." Over and over, the words worn smooth from repetition, the way a stone in a river gets worn smooth. Haruto stood there and let himself listen, because it did not feel like something he was allowed to interrupt. And standing there in the cold doorway, he felt something come up in him that he had been carrying without quite naming it since the night Emmy had died. He had been asleep that night on the sofa pulled up close to her hospital bed, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her hand without sitting up. The room had smelled faintly of antiseptic and of the tangerines someone had left on the windowsill, and the machine by the bed had ticked along steadily, and somewhere in the depth of that sleep she had begun to choke quietly, and he had not woken. By the time the nurses came, it was already over, and no one had ever once blamed him for it out loud. Not Kenji, not the doctors, not any of the relatives who had said far crueler things about far smaller matters at the funeral. But Haruto had gone on blaming himself anyway, quietly, in the specific way a person blames himself for a single dulled, sleeping hour that he cannot go back and live differently. He had told no one, because there had never seemed to be a way to say it that did not sound like he was asking to be forgiven for something too large to forgive. Watching Kenji's small folded back in the cold, murmuring the same 3 words to a photograph, Haruto understood, all at once, that he was not the only one who had spent these weeks talking to someone who could no longer answer. So he did the only thing that felt true, which was to step out onto the cold boards of the ingwa in his socked feet and lower himself all the way down onto his knees. He pressed his forehead flat against the wood, the way he had once seen done at a funeral and never done himself, and the grain of it was cold enough to sting, and he stayed there anyway. He told Kenji, in a voice that came out smaller than he meant it to, that he was sorry, that he had been right there, asleep beside her, and he had not noticed. He said again, because once did not feel like enough, that he had been so close he could have touched her, and he had slept through the only moment that mattered, and he did not know how to carry that. And he was sorry. He was so sorry. The cold came up through the floorboards into his knees and did not touch him at all. Not really, next to the much larger cold of finally saying the thing out loud after weeks of swallowing it whole. Kenji did not let him stay down there for long. He reached over and took hold of the back of Haruto's collar, not unkindly, and hauled him upright the way you might haul up a boy who has fallen rather than a young man of nearly 20. He told him, in a voice gone rough at the edges, that he was not to blame, not for any of it, and that he ought to stop shouting apologies loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. He said that Emmy had gone quietly, in her sleep, without pain that anyone had seen, and that a person could not be blamed for sleeping when he was tired, and had been tired for a very long time. If anyone in this house had earned the right to a few hours of undisturbed sleep, he said it was Haruto. And then, more quietly, almost to himself, he added that he had said much the same thing to himself most nights this month, about 100 small moments he wished he had noticed sooner. Grief seemed to work that way for everyone, he thought, handing out blame to whoever happened to be standing closest when it happened. They sat down together on the ingwa after that, the door still open to the cold garden, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. Haruto looked sideways at Kenji's face in the thin light coming from the house, at the lines around his eyes that seemed to have deepened in a matter of weeks. He thought about all the words he had never used for this man, Otu-san among them, the plain, ordinary word other children scribbled onto school forms without ever once considering how heavy it might be to say out loud. He thought about Emmy, too, and about a word he had never managed to give her while she was alive, no matter how many times he had rehearsed it in the shower, in the dark of his room, on the long walk home from school. The chance for that word had simply run out one quiet night, while he slept 2 feet away from her. He was not going to let that happen twice in one lifetime. So he opened his mouth, and what came out first was not what he meant at all, some strange, sideways joke about owing Kenji money. The kind of deflecting nonsense a person reaches for when the real sentence is too heavy to lift on the first try. He heard himself say it and wanted, in the same breath, to take it back. Kenji only blinked at him, and for a moment the whole cold night nearly tipped over in a laughter instead, which would have been fine too, except that Haruto could feel the real sentence still sitting there underneath, patient, waiting for him to stop stalling. So he tried again. This time the word came out plain and small and completely undecorated, the shortest word he owned, Dad, spoken into the cold garden air, not Otison, not any of the careful, formal versions he had practiced. For a moment, Kenji did not move at all, and Haruto thought, with a small falling feeling, that perhaps he had said it wrong, or too late, or that some words really do have a window, and is had already closed. And then Kenji's face simply came apart, the way a face does when a person has been holding it together out of sheer habit for far too long. He put a hand over his own eyes and cried without any sound at all, which was somehow harder to watch than if he had been loud about it. Haruto felt his own eyes go hot and blurred almost the instant he saw it, the way a yawn moved from one person to another without permission, and he found that he was crying too, for the first time since the funeral itself. The two of them sat there shoulder to shoulder on a freezing veranda, with no words left between them at all. It was an unglamorous kind of crying, noses running in the cold, neither of them reaching for a tissue, and it went on for a while, and neither of them apologized for it, because for once there was nothing in the room that needed apologizing for. When Haruto could speak again, he found there was one more thing sitting in his chest that he needed Kenji to know, something he had never told anyone, not even Emi herself, not in so many words. He admitted that for years he had wanted to call her mom, plainly out loud, the way he had just now managed to call Kenji dad. He said he had rehearsed it more times than he could count in the mirror on the stairs, standing outside her sick room door with his hand not quite touching the handle. But he had always been afraid. He told him, afraid that if he said it and she did not answer, or answered strangely, or simply looked at him the wrong way for half a second, he would not survive it. So the word had stayed folded up inside him, never once spoken where she could hear it. Except he told Kenji that was not quite true either, because there had been a way around his own fear, a small, cowardly, tender way. On nights when he had gone to check on her and found her already asleep, her breathing slow, and even he would stand very close to the bed and say it anyway, just once, just the word, Mom, spoken so quietly it could not possibly have reached her. He had done a handful of times over the months of her illness, always when he was sure she was sleeping, always in a voice pitched just below the edge of hearing. He had told no one, because it had felt, at the time, like a secret he was allowed to keep only as long as it cost her nothing to receive it. He remembered, too, without quite meaning to say it out loud, the rice balls she used to make him, plain ones, just tuna and flakes of dried bonito folded through warm rice, and how he had never once told her they were his favorite thing in the world. Kenji was quiet for a long moment after that, looking out at the dark garden, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone soft in a way Haruto had not heard from him before. He said that he did not think a mother needed to be awake to hear a thing like that. If there was any justice at all in how these things work, he said she had heard every one of those small, whispered words exactly when they were spoken, and had simply chosen, out of some private kindness of her own, never to let on. He said it the way a man says something he has decided, quietly and on his own, to believe completely, and Haruto did not argue with him, because he wanted very badly to believe it too. They stayed out on the Angawa a while longer, the cold finally starting to matter again now that the two of them had said what needed saying. Eventually Kenji reached over and slid the garden door shut, and the small, ordinary sounds of the house began to come back one at a time. A pipe ticking somewhere, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Haruto picked up the cold cup of barley tea from the low table and did not drink it, only held it in both hands for the warmth it no longer had, which was, in its own way, enough. He thought that grief, it turned out, did not end in a single bow or a single word finally spoken after years of practicing it in mirrors. But it could, every now and then, soften for an evening into something almost like company. Somewhere in the house, a clock he had never paid attention to before ticked on quietly, counting out a night that, for once, neither of them was in any hurry to end. Later, when they finally went inside and pulled the futons out for the night, Kenji left the small photograph on the table by the doorway rather than putting it away, facing the room, as if she might like to see it lived in a little longer. And so the two of them settled into the warm house at last, a father and a son who had chosen each other twice now, once by paperwork years ago, and once tonight by an ordinary word finally spoken out loud into the cold. That, perhaps, is where this particular story and this long night of stories comes to rest. Our story has come to its end tonight. If you have stayed with us this long, thank you for letting this voice sit beside you in the dark, for letting these words carry you somewhere quieter than your own thoughts. Somewhere along the way, most of you have already drifted off, and that was always the point. This was never really for the ones who stayed awake. It was for the tired mind that needed something gentle to hold onto until sleep could take over completely. Wherever you are now, still listening or already halfway into a dream, I hope what comes next is deep, unhurried rest. You don't need to remember every detail of what was said. Let it dissolve the way a dream does into rest. No sudden waking, no racing thoughts, just hours of stillness until the morning finds you on its own quiet schedule. And when it does, I hope it's gentle, a soft light through the curtains. A little more time than you think you have. There will be more nights like this one, and more stories waiting whenever you need them. You don't have to do anything now. Just let your eyes stay closed. If you find your way back here on another night, more stories will be waiting. Rest well. Let go of tonight and everything before it. Good night.